Hey there, I'm Ryan, and welcome to today's acrylic landscape lesson. All of the tools and materials will be listed in the video description, and if you'd like help with the drawing process, I'll also have the traceable up over on Patreon, along with the reference photo for color matching. With that said, this channel is predominantly fan-funded, so if you feel like you're enjoying, you're having fun, you're learning things, do consider checking out the Patreon. We do have a lot of fun things up there on top of the reference photos and traceables, like that of my ebooks, and even a bunch of polls. So, a bunch of fun stuff. Do check it out if you're enjoying. But with that, let's jump into it and have some fun. Now we're going to begin here today on a 9 by 12 inch canvas and with a 1 inch flat-headed brush. Though I am going to start by dipping the bottom third of it into a little bit of water. This is going to allow our paint to stay wet for a longer period of time, and of course I am wiping off the excess. Now we'll begin very simply here today by taking quite a bit of our titanium white, moving that off to a clean spot on our palette. We'll grab just a hint of our ultramarine blue, about 1/10 that of our titanium white, and then about 1/10 that of our Mars black as well. Then we'll mix it all up very, very well. That way we don't have portions that are brighter, darker, a little bit more blue, but this should render a nice, relatively desaturated blue, and this will be fantastic for sky. It's going to complement a lot of the pinks and the purple as well, but it's not going to be overwhelming, and it's not going to overshadow them. It's not going to be too saturated, so that is exactly what we're looking for. That said, now that we've tested it, now that I know it's the color I want, we're going to mix up quite a bit more, and then we'll apply that to the canvas. But I generally like to mix a smaller amount of my colors just to do a little test, make sure it's what I actually want, and then once I'm sure, we mix a bit more, and we commit to the canvas. With that said, you will notice throughout this painting, I do go over a lot of my initial drawings, and I like to do that just so I get the chance to figure out where everything's going to go initially, and I can always redraw on everything, make changes if I want, but I find it just really allows me to get acquainted with the piece first, and that's why I am essentially okay with going over the drawings and redoing them. Get a lot of questions about that. But here, going over these areas multiple times, because acrylic paints are inherently semi-transparent, you want a nice thick application, and this is just a great way to get started. So you know what? We'll just add a little bit more of that pigment, and you can see every time we make it, need to make little adjustments, but we always get there in the end. Apply that to the bottom, work it all the way back up, starting to build up a good base. And I'm also going to take some of this pigment, and I'm not just placing it in the middle in the openings, I'm going to randomly splash in some openings as well throughout here. That way we can have spots in the trees that aren't as full, where the foliage is a little bit less prominent, and it'll just look a lot more three-dimensional to give it significantly more depth, more detail. So I'll do a little patch right up here, and then we'll cover the majority of it later on with pinks and purples, but for now that's great. And we'll go over this yet again. With that, I'm going to let all of it dry, come back, do a second layer, and then we'll move on to the next step together. Now we'll be switching to the Filbert brush. This one is about 1/3 of an inch, and as you can see, the edges are a little bit round, which will help us with our blending, though it can still carry quite a bit of paint. Now for our next step, we're going to put in the base layer for this larger area of foliage, and we don't want it to be too bright, but we also don't want it to be too dark. We're looking for a mid-value, something we can add shadows to, but also something we can add highlights to. So we're going to begin here with some quinacridone magenta, and I will have all of the colors listed in the description so you can check out the spelling, but with that, we'll add quite a bit of it to a clean spot on our palette. We'll grab about half that amount in titanium white, about half that in Mars black, and yet again we'll mix up a very consistent pigment. Again, we don't want portions to be darker, brighter, we want it to all be fairly samey, And then we'll try applying that to the canvas. I think it might be a little bit too dark, so we'll just make a slight adjustment, add more titanium white, and I think that is a really, really pretty pigment. So, now we'll start applying that, and you can probably tell that this is actually quite a bit thicker than what we have here, and that's simply because the titanium white pigment is a lot more thick than something like the magenta, and therefore we just don't have to do as much layering, which is kind of nice. We'll definitely have to do multiple layers because it is acrylic, but we are able to get more paint on there to cover up more of that canvas. Now, we switched to this brush because it allows us to do some nice blending, can still carry a good amount of paint. However, you can see all of these little markings that it's making that we might not have gotten if we use the 1-inch flat-headed brush. And I want all of those. They are going to add some nice texture to our trees. They're going to make it look more realistic and just less bland than it would have been had everything been kind of initially mixed and blended perfectly, right? Sometimes in these scenes where you have a lot of nature, you want that organic look, and using a brush like this and allowing the imperfections of the stroke can actually be really beneficial. So here, as you can see, I'm just continuing this on. And by the way, the harder you press with your brush, the more your paint will expand, the more of a surface area you'll be able to cover. However, it does rip paint from one area to move it to another often. So when I do this, watch, you kind of end up with these markings where you can see the canvas underneath, and if you want to cover those up, you feel like it's just too much, you go over it with a softer stroke, a little bit of a tap, a little bit of a drag, and eventually you can kind of work over all of those areas, but it's with a very soft touch. That said, I do intend to go back and do another layer, which will cover up pretty much all of those smaller opening areas, so it really isn't anything to be concerned about. And when I really want to get the paint on there, move it about to a great degree, I go in with an X-shaped pattern, like that, because not only does it move the paint from the left to the right, but it also moves it up and down, right? And then I go in with little touch-ups, just using a bunch of different techniques. And I know this is essentially a wall of purple right now. There's no depth, it's very flat, it looks messy. It is meant to. That is just part of the process of acrylic painting, but you saw the thumbnail. Have faith, we will turn this into something quite pretty. With that, I'm going to just extend this up, and I'm going to show you how we approach the edge because it is a little bit different. Now, as you can see, there's a little bit of canvas still showing between the sky and this larger purple area, and right there, all we're going to do is take our pigment and we're going to do little taps that move out in varying directions. So sometimes we'll go over the sky and we'll do a little drag in, other times we'll just do a little bit of a tap and we'll let it handle it naturally. But you can see that I'm rotating my brush a little bit in the air before I go through these taps. And then I'll just apply a little bit more pressure and connect it to this larger body. And then we'll just do that tapping motion so that it doesn't have a hard stop. But this is essentially inevitably going to be the little protruding pieces of foliage, trying to get lots of little markings and details. You don't want any of them to be too big because that'll imply that the actual tree will be a bit larger. When you move closer to the foreground, you can expand them, but when you're super far away, like we are here, you really want these to be as miniature as possible. So we have them, the kind of cross-hatching, there are little openings here and there, but this is a very early detail which is inevitably going to build up to something pretty pretty. So I'll just apply that, lead that in. We're going to do all of this on the left-hand side, but I don't want to take on too much at once. I'm going to kind of compartmentalize different portions of the painting. So I'm going to let all of this dry fully, and then once it's dry, I'll apply a second layer, and then we'll go from there, start adding in some shadows, some highlights, and actually making it look like it should. So here I'm applying my second layer, and I started right here at the top. I'm working my way downwards, and as you can probably tell, all of this looks substantially different from what we have here. You can't see that white of the canvas showing through our applications. I'm still trying to leave some brush strokes for, again, that nice organic texture that can show through our following two layers, but for the most part, we are trying to get a nice thick application. Generally, it is those thick applications which, in the end, makes a piece look a whole lot more professional. And I think often, when we're at the beginning stages of painting, we don't put on enough paint because we just went out and we purchased all of these different colors, all these brushes, right? We don't want to waste anything, and that's entirely understandable. But the painting really does get a lot better when you start committing a fair amount of paint and ensure that everything does get well covered. So I really am just going back, giving it that nice proper final touch, and remixing quite a bit of paint as I go. While I like to start with a minimal amount, and then once I kind of confirm that it is indeed the correct color, I do like to go back and remix my colors a couple of times, just because it really instills how to get to those colors, those pigments. So in the future, if I want to do something similar, it's not too difficult to kind of refine that or find the way to it, right? It's kind of just solidifying ideas in our head. So once I have what I want, you know what, that could be a little bit darker. This is why we remix a number of times and, again, make those edits. And the bottom can be a little bit darker because the light is coming from the top. The farther down you get, the less light you're going to have. So you can have a little bit of a gradient, but I don't want a grand one. And again, just filling all of this in. Once it is, I'm going to show you a little protruding area we can incorporate, add some extra detail, and then we'll move on to the textured shadows. Now, right up here, close to the top, I do want some protruding foliage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a little marking far out here, and then I'm going to, through this tapping motion, bring it right back to our larger application, leaving these little openings to show that it's not hyper thick, it's just a little bit that's sticking out and creating this interesting look. And then you can kind of expand from there. I like to generally start by making extra pieces smaller, and then over time I make them larger. That way I just have more of an opportunity, more of a chance to play with it. If you start by making things like that very large from the start, it's difficult to walk them back, because then you have to remix the perfect color for the sky and make sure that you don't have any start and stop points, right? But if we just apply less to begin, and then we slowly add more, it's just a lot easier. It's a lot easier to paint more of the purple than it is to take it away. So just make that a bit more interesting. And I'm doing that particularly up here because we are getting closer to us. This is the distance, and then as we move up there, it gets closer. We get to see more detail. And so protruding pieces like this are more noticeable. They exist down here, we just can't really see them because they're too far away. So we're already implementing depth without gradients simply by changing the way our subjects are rendered. There we go. Now we're going to mix a darker variant of this color for the shadows, which we'll see underneath the highlights, but we're going to do so with the 1-inch flat-headed brush that we used for the sky, and I'm just switching to this because it can pick up and move around a lot more paint than the filbert, and I am going to want quite a bit of paint. Now, we want a darker variant of the color that we were just working with, so I'm actually mixing it right beside / on top of what we had. That way I have it as a constant example. And, it's not too far away. I'm not kind of saying, oh, what, is that actually darker? By mixing them right beside or on top, it's much, much better. And mine has fully dried, by the way, so the lighter pigment isn't impacting this new darker pigment at all. With that, the goal here is really just to add a little bit more Mars Black and a little bit less titanium white. We want more Mars Black because we want it to be darker, and we want less of the titanium white because if we're adding more Mars Black, we're going to desaturate it, and the titanium white is also going to desaturate it. It also makes sense that we use less white in a pigment that we want to be darker, right? So, with that, once I get a good amount of this mixed up, and I do think that's quite a good amount for the beginning here, I'm going to switch to a different brush. For the application process, I'll be using a 1/2 inch flat-headed brush, and this one has very stiff bristles. I'm actually going to peel them back so that we get a very randomized assortment of them. And so when I go in with a tapping motion with this brush, we're under hundreds of little applications for our little pieces on the tree. So we're just going to try to rough this up a little bit, peel back, apply some pressure, hold it, and just make it a little bit more randomized. But with that, let's jump back into the painting process. So now we're going to go to our palette and we're going to very lightly touch the bristles to that pigment that we have. I don't want to apply a lot of pressure because if we get a lot of paint, it's going to condense all of our bristles and we don't want them. We want them to be as far apart as they can be. So I'll just grab a little bit of paint and then I come into here and I do this little tapping effect. You can probably hear it. But as you can see, it's creating all of these micro applications. They're very small, but they're quite visible. We have a real contrast between the darker and the lighter variants of our purple, and that's great. That's exactly what we want. We're going to want more of them down towards the bottom of the painting, because again, we'll have more shadows in that area. The light just isn't able to reach there as well as it is the top because we have more trees, more subjects to render more shadows. And you can also tell that often throughout this process, not only am I just going in and I'm tapping, I'm rotating my brush, tapping, rotating my brush, tapping, and then I just pick up speed and I do it all very quickly. But you don't want to do that rotation when the brush has contact with the canvas because then you'll end up creating a large stroke and that's not what we want here. This is definitely something that should be just a litany of small little implications. There we go. And I'm going over areas a number of times, that way we don't have very noticeable, larger kind of dark spots. Again, these are going to be all of the shadows. It is the areas in which there are openings in the tree. You can see into the deeper portion, which again doesn't have as much light. And with that, we'll get you a little bit closer. So yet again, we'll grab more of that pigment, go in with those taps, and if you're worried that you're losing a lot of the bright, vibrant initial application, don't worry about that. That is okay. We just wanted a purple base to work on top of, and we're going to go over all of these dark applications with an even brighter application than what we've used before. So it really is all about just building layers and having faith in the process. This will also look a little bit awkward. It'll kind of make the painting look a little bit fuzzy almost. And again, that's okay. It's all part of the process. Trying not to apply too much pressure so that I don't expand my bristles. And I go over the bottom area more frequently than I go over the top area because I want that bottom area to be darker. I also generally go until I fully run out of paint on my brush because as I get towards the later taps and applications, the pigment is less opaque, it's less thick. So I get these more subtle markings, which are really nice for filling in the gaps in between the larger, more opaque spots. And that's very noticeable right now. You can see just how soft these look in comparison. But it's still really nice texture. And you essentially don't want any open, flat purple at the end of this. I think it's quite noticeable still in between some of the darker areas, so I'll have to go back with less paint on my brush and kind of fill in these portions. But I also do want some level of variance, so here you can see this is a bit darker. I'm going to kind of create a intentionally larger spot of it here, and then I can move up through there. And integrating these little shapes, these movements, is also going to eventually build up to something that's quite natural. So there are a lot of different minor techniques and processes that you can work into here that are going to make it stand out, beautiful, work really well. And while it does just seem like tapping, again, there are a lot of things to consider. There are a lot of little ideas and techniques that are going to add up and make it look a whole lot better if you do incorporate them and follow them as well. So, to recap, we want little clusters, varying shapes and sizes that are different from everything else. That way we have a unique organic look. We want the bottom to be a little bit darker than the top. We want a natural progression from that dark to that light. As you run out of paint, we want to go over previously darker areas to fill it in with the slightly softer little needle effect. And we want to go over areas multiple times, but we don't ever want to apply so much that you no longer see any of the initial pinkish purple, right? There we go. This obviously needs to be quite dark. This, I think, is getting to a nice point of bright and almost at the point where I need some more pigment. So let's actually go back to mixing. So here we are from a bit of a distance, and I do like to show the painting process from both NFR and close up. That way you do get to see what all of the details really look like, what all of the applications are rendering in real time, but also what it looks like from a bit of a distance, because, and I know I say this in every painting lesson, but it's so important. When you look at a painting for the very first time, often it is from quite a distance. You walk into a room and it's 10 feet away from you. So you don't you don't pick up on all of the small details, all of the little techniques. What matters is the painting as a whole, the composition, how it's all working together. And so I like to show you it from a bit of a distance, because you should be taking steps back 5 to 6 every 10, 20 minutes or so, just ensuring that everything is coming together, progressing naturally the way you'd like. And that way you can go back in, get close, and make those adjustments. But often we can get so tied down and invested in the details that we kind of lose sight of the piece as a whole. So just make sure that you are taking those steps back and making sure that it all does work together, progress the way you want it to. Here, from a distance, I think it's quite noticeable just how much darker this is than what we have at the top. And now that I've started to run out of paint, I'll just go back up to the top and do some taps. I'll get the majority of my pigment off down here, and now we'll head back up. And I'll just slowly rework all of this throughout the painting. You can have darker areas up here, by the way, but we only want it in smaller and controlled amounts. That way it is an anomaly that, again, makes it look more natural and organic, but it doesn't conflict with what we have down there. This little spot that I just applied is a perfect example, and here I'll go back in with more paint rather than applying the majority of it down here. Thicken that up a little bit. It's very noticeable. Now we have a second little spot there, and that's essentially enough. That's all I really need to, again, make that look more organic, so I'll take off more of my pigment, and then I'll go in and you can see just how much more subtle these applications are, right? Get some of that paint off down there, and then take what's left up here. And it doesn't happen quickly. You can see that I'm going back and I'm doing it quite a lot. It's a process, you build it up, and you eventually get there. Now for our next step, we're going to be switching over to a small liner brush, and these are great for applying details like that of branches and tree trunks, and that is the next step. So now we're going to take our liner brush, make sure it's a little bit damp, grab some of that Mars Black and just a hint of our Titanium White. We'll go for a bit more of a grayish tree because gray generally brings out other colors, makes them pop more. So once we have something that's quite dark, we're going to start implementing some of our tree trunks and branches. Now I'm going to have this weaving in and out of our foliage, so you can see that they're going to be start and stop points. And for the most part, I'd recommend going in and creating these through a series of strokes. I think a lot of us naturally want to go in and just create one solid line, but trees have movement and you're going to get something that looks a lot more natural if you create these by going in, doing a little bit of a movement, going in, doing a little bit of a movement. It creates all of these little wonky motions, which just really sells the subject on being something that did, grow outside, have interactions with different wildlife, different weather. It's just going to make it much more believable. So do try to just make it look a little bit more randomized. And I'm trying to ensure that these have different movements. These two obviously have a parallel, but you can see that this one's a little bit shorter than this one. This one is taller than these two. We have multiple breaks up over here. And we can kind of have these different little pieces that come out up here as well. I'm going to be going in later on with a highlight, and that'll be covering a lot of these. And that's important because we want it to very much feel like the branches are weaving in and out of the foliage, that they're both in front of and behind. And so by doing this, we'll paint them on top of what we have here, but then we're also going to have them sit behind the highlights. So it all builds up. Again, it's another stage that'll look a little unnatural, but eventually it'll look fantastic. And I like to start off by making these as small as I can, and then over time I'll make them a little bit larger, or at least some of them, right? We don't want it to be all of them. I do want this to be larger. It's close to us. We can create depth by progressively making them larger as they do get closer to us as we move this way. And you also want to make sure that the bottom is the most thick portion. It only makes sense if they do kind of taper as we move upwards. So that's also something to work with. There we go. Make that one a little bit bigger, though it doesn't have to be massive. Just because it's in the foreground, it can still be a smaller, younger tree, right? Different things to consider. You can also use a slightly smaller liner brush. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. I might as I move farther into the background there. And I also like to combine different portions of trees, so now this has two different movements. I think that's neat. There we go. It's all just slowly adding up. Let's get you a little bit closer for this area though. So here we'll take an even smaller liner brush because we are getting farther back in the painting. We do want slightly more detail. We'll make sure that it's nice and damp, that way the bristles are condensed. And then here in the distance we'll create some of these trees. Some are more diagonal, some are more straight, but when we want larger ones we do definitely skip spaces, little areas, so it does look like they're, again, weaving in and out of our foliage, creating that depth, and therefore an interesting piece. You can also have them overlap each other here and there. That's always a nice little look. And you might find, this is only really going to apply to some people, but you might find that when you go to apply paint for the very first time, you have a larger application, which kind of makes sense. You aren't immediately in the practice of applying that pressure, so you can accidentally apply too much and therefore end up with just a larger stroke. And then as you continue it gets smaller. And if that is the case for you, start on the bottom and work your way up. That way it kind of dissipates as you move towards the top. However, you have to make sure that as you make that stroke, you don't apply any more pressure. Otherwise, it will get larger as you move towards the top. Where when I start at the top, I like to apply as little pressure as I can. And then I start to apply slightly more as I move down towards the bottom. So it expands the stroke very minorly. And it does eventually have a bit of an effect. These are all very minute details, techniques that you can incorporate. But again, it's all of these techniques that slowly add up to making a really, really wonderful painting. There we go. I think this is going great though. And I think with some highlights, it's going to look beautiful. And we are almost there. So I'll just finish up a couple of these applications. And then we'll move on to that next step together. Though, with the larger trees, do try to do 2 layers. That way it's nice and thick. Same rule applies as the base layer for it, the sky. You know, acrylic paints, multiple layers. It's generally a pretty good idea. But with that, I think I'm quite happy, and we'll move on to the next step. So now it's time to add some highlights to all of this, though do make sure it's fully dry before you do proceed. With that, we are going to go back to the 1-inch flat-headed brush for quite a bit of blending. We'll grab a lot of that. We'll grab quite a bit of our titanium white, maybe 1/3 to what we have of our magenta, and then we'll grab a very small portion, just a hint of Mars Black, because now we do want to start working on our highlights, and that means it needs to be brighter than that mid value that we have right there. So I'm going to add some extra titanium white, brighten it up, and as you can see, we already have something that's brighter than that, but I'm going to show you what we could do with it. We could add a lot more titanium white, a lot more of this, and really make it quite a bit brighter. This isn't what we want right now. We want more of a mid-mixture. We want room to add to it. So for now, we're going to go with something like that. I'll just take off my excess, mix up slightly more abundant amount, and then we'll switch our brushes for the actual application. Now we'll be switching over to a softer fan brush, and this is fantastic because when it gets paint on it, when it gets water on it, these condense a little bit, and so when we go in with a tapping motion, we get about 7 or 8 little applications, but they're larger than what we got with the flat-headed brush, and they will look like clusters of foliage. So really great brush to render a lot of detail quite quickly, but in a different way, in a different manner than the flat-headed brush. With that, let's grab some paint, hop back into the canvas. Now, as per usual, we'll dip the bottom portion of our fan brush into some water. That way it does, as you can see, condense some of those bristles. Now, we'll go ahead, grab some of our pigment, not applying a lot of pressure, getting it on both sides of the brush as you can see. And now we're going to head into the very top area of these trees, because that's where the light is going to be coming for the most part. We're going to expand slightly past where we went with the previous application. So we're going to move on top of the sky a little bit because we do want this to be protruding, catching a lot of light. It's going to be more noticeable. We'll get more detail than we previously did. And you're going to want to rotate your brush quite frequently to get a different look. And then we can start moving our way inwards. Now with this, if you're not careful, you can render just a lot of very straight lines. So I'm going to rotate my brush as I go through a lot of these applications. And we're essentially crafting larger pieces that protrude and move outwards from the rest of the tree that are going to catch more light. So we're not going to do this in all of the areas, but it's really going to afford us an opportunity to start rendering form and depth. I think that already these applications are looking beautiful. And I do like to start at the top and work my way down. I don't like to begin in the middle or the bottom because we want it to dissipate as we get farther down. And if we apply a lot at the bottom accidentally, then we have to go and do a lot at the top, potentially far more than we initially intended or wanted to. So we just take it slow, we work our way down. There we are. We also don't want that area to be kind of overdone. We're looking for lots of the openings. We still want to see the darker initial applications, right? We still want to see small portions of the base layer that we applied. Though I am going to use this and sometimes just corners of the brush to craft little pieces like that kind of cut off where the branches are, or where they leave rather. So we left openings, and now we're kind of placing this in between a lot of those openings to show that there is foliage that's farther out, that's covering them up. It's going to visually make a lot of sense. And that again is why we wanted those openings, so that we could place these applications over top. And you can randomly put these applications on top of the tree trunks as well. That will show that, again, they are in front, and that's what you want with the brightest pigment. Trying to be, again, not do too much. And I know I've kept you farther back for the majority of this. Again, intentional. Because while the details are nice to look at, what really matters here more than anything else is balancing the amount of them. With that, I think we have a fairly good understanding of how we want to have it progressively move down, how we're working in different clusters. So I think we will get a little bit closer for you. So here we are around the top of our tree. We'll just grab some of that pigment. Again, you really want to start on the edges. Do a couple little taps, rotate that brush, have it move out, create its own little pieces. And then once we're satisfied with that, we can start moving inwards, covering up the opening, covering up that opening. But again, leaving lots of area exposed. So we have those different layers of depth, so that while this area is brighter, while it is higher, while it gets more light, there are still portions that don't receive that light because some areas just stick out a lot more. Create those shadows, and that's important. You can see how it's all building up though. And this is only our third layer. If we wanted, we could go back in with an even brighter mixture and add to the depth to a greater degree. However, we do want to be careful with that because this is the distance, this is the background, and you don't always want to incorporate too much saturation or contrast in the background. Generally, you want to save a lot of that for a foreground so that our foreground subjects really pop, and those happen to be on the left-hand side of this painting. So what we're doing here is a bit more careful, a bit more measured, and intentionally so. However, if we end up doing the left-hand side and we say, you know what, we can add to this, we can brighten it, it won't take away from our main subjects, then we have that opportunity. But you don't want to go ahead and do that too early because you're not sure yet how the more primary areas of the painting are going to turn out. So we're just going to be nice and safe. And now I'm just looking at these little areas, fairly open still, and when I have almost no paint on my brush, that is when I handle those, because I don't want them to be hyper noticeable. I don't want them to be hyper stark, but I do still want that added texture, that added detail, right? We're in the foreground, but I still want to see that darker area behind. So I just wait till I start to run out of paint a little bit. Yeah, that's looking really nice. Now, yet again, here we are, a little bit of a distance. I'm going to take the majority of the paint off my brush in these higher areas, going over a couple of them again, though not too many times to the point where I'm losing the general form and the detail. Because if you do apply too much to one area, it'll all essentially clump together and you won't have all of those individual little spots. Something to be careful about. However, once I get the majority of that paint off my brush, I come back down here and I say, you know what, this area looks like it could have some extra highlight, a little bit here too. And we have this darker portion in the middle, and as you can see, the highlights pick back up again down at the bottom, because this is essentially open area where you do see deep into the trees where they don't get light. But then down here at the bottom, you have all of the fallen little pieces, and they're a bit closer. They're stretched out, they're closer to the water. They're going to get that nice highlight. So that is where we start to reincorporate it. See that? And then we let it dissipate as you move up into this middle section. Though it isn't really the middle, it's more 2/3 of the way down. And then I'll let it dissipate as we move farther into the background. Not because it's going to particularly have less light here than it would here, but because we want the foreground area, the areas that are closest to us, to pop to a greater degree. So I'll just let that dissipate very naturally. Maybe add a little bit of that texture throughout, just so it doesn't look not connected. There we go. And you know what? As I did take those steps back before starting this step, I realized that there's still quite a bit of room to grow in terms of highlight here, and we can definitely do a little bit more before kind of worrying about overcommitting. So I'm going to put my fan brush down. I'm going to grab the flat-headed brush. I'm going to say, okay, we can make that a little bit brighter. Grab some titanium white, grab some of our magenta. It's still wet, so this will mix with what we previously had there. Grab the smallest hint of Mars Black. Tell that it's a little bit brighter. Still not what that is, but we don't want it to be. Not yet. We're saving that for the left-hand side. Go back, grab my fan brush, head up to the top. Apply it in all of the areas that protrude the most, along the sides. And this is just one more application, which is going to give us a bit more depth. You can also go in with a liner brush and get some very finite detail if you would like. That's more of an end step thing for me though. I like the more randomized approach that this offers, because often we can oversimplify things when we really think about them, when we consider subjects. So many of our ideas about what different elements of nature look like kind of come from media we were exposed to as a kid, often that being cartoons. And so we oversimplify things because when we think about them, our brain, in terms of art, kind of moves back to that time. So I like this because it randomizes things so that I can't kind of subconsciously take over and render something that does look very unrealistic. And this is just going to keep it a bit more organic. That's why the tapping effect is so great. But with that, very, very happy. And I think we can move on to our next step. Now, as we head over to the left-hand side, we are going to switch back to our filbert brush. So we're going to begin, of course, by making said filbert brush a little bit damp, and then we'll remix the same initial pigment that we used as the base layer over on that side. So we know we need quite a bit of magenta. I think about 1/3 it in titanium white, same goes for Mars Black, and we are trying to mix the color that we have right here on our palette. I do often try to keep just a hint of each color mixed on there, just so I can compare and contrast later if I need to go back to it, and it of course is being very helpful here. So I'm just kind of going back between our three pigments, and it's a lot easier to color match when you're only using a singular hue and then, you know, black and white. But we were able to find it. That's fantastic. And now we'll head into this area. So I'm going to begin here with that tapping effect that you remember we used along the edges. And that's just me rotating my brush. That way I can create all of those independent little pieces. We're going to leave openings. That way we have small bits of our sky showing through. and we'll move it all the way down here, where it will temporarily get lost because the value and the hue is so similar to what we have in the background there. It's not going to stand out or be noticeable. However, that really isn't going to be an issue. And we'll just continue that right down here. So from there, we are going to start filling in that middle section. However, you have a couple of options. You can work around your drawn in trees, or you can just cover them up and paint them in later. I'm going to initially here roughly work around them. However, if I end up feeling like I just want the space, the liberty, I will cover them up and I'll just draw them back in. We can always go back to earlier in the video. If you're up over on Patreon, you can look at the traceable, or actually print out the traceable, use it with a projector, do so many different things, right? But for now, I'm just going to do my job here and filling in this space. Go over areas a couple of times as we have before, because again, we do want to ensure that our applications are nice and thick. And you can even make your mid value a little bit darker than what it initially was, because we are in the foreground and we are going to be working with higher level of contrast. So that means darker darks, lighter lights, more saturated pigments, pretty much all of that good stuff. Here again, working roughly around my drawing of the tree trunk and branches. Though it's worth noting, in these areas, I'm definitely moving on top of the tree more than I am avoiding it. So that way I don't have to expand the tree later on because I don't have enough background painted, and I'll have the option to expand the tree instead if I want to. And that's generally going to give you more options. So if you're ever worried about, covering up your drawing, definitely opt to cover up the drawing over leaving the area a bit too empty, right? Because you will inevitably give yourself more option by covering it up, which I know probably sounds a little counterintuitive, but it's one of those things that you learn over time, and then as soon as you do, it makes painting a whole lot easier. With that, we will continue mixing. I like to do that over and over again so that again we retain those ideas, how we mix to the colors we want. And I know that you are pretty far back. Again, it is intentional just so we can see the general motions, how everything's going. Here I think we'll leave an opening in the tree. We'll expand that out even more, just so it's not a flat wall that you have different protruding pieces, right? I think that makes it a whole lot more interesting. And I am applying slightly more pressure with my applications through here than I was in any of that, because I want my applications to be bigger, because I want our actual little pieces to be more observable. They're not so far in the distance. You can actually see the detail, you can see the sizing, you can see individual ones and clusters, and we just have a lot more opportunity. Now in this larger area, I'm going to leave a lot of little openings initially. Give us plenty of opportunity to either take things out or add them in. There we go. However, I haven't gone back to my palette in a while, and my paint's all getting a little bit thin. So I definitely need to go over that with a second there, but let's get you a little bit closer so you can see the application process. So heading back up here, again, quite fun because this is where things really start to change. It's not so much just working on the larger body of our application. We can have little protruding pieces, and that's exactly what I'm working on right here. They did all, of course, get covered up as we painted the sky, but I do have the painting, which I'm basing this off of, because this was actually a spring-ish summer painting that I did a while ago. But I knew that I wanted it in a different palette with a different type of trees, and I love that. I love finding compositions that work in different seasons and different scenarios, and just seeing how far you can stretch it, how you can kind of get creative with a similar composition, right? Because with every composition you have so many options. Like, is it going to be at night? Is it going to be during the day? Is it sunset? Is it during winter or spring? Is it, there's so many different types of trees and options, and I love just doing different renditions with similar general compositional ideas. Just trying everything out. And that's what I'm doing here with this one. So I have my painting above and I'm painting along to those general movements. Here, it's worth noting that we have a lot of openings in the tree, and again, this all looks a whole lot worse than that because it's still layer number 1 of what will at least be 3. Still need to work in the shadows, still need to work in the highlights, still need to refine details and do all of that fun stuff. So we'll get there, but we're not quite there. So this area is rather interesting. We're going to move it on top of some of our previous applications. I know people can get a little hesitant when you cover up something that you've previously done that you like. However, to build depth properly, it's something that just needs to occur. It's only natural that some subjects will cover other subjects. So here, I'm just going to give this a bit more of a draping effect. And then I'll lead it into this. It won't be hyper noticeable yet because, again, we haven't worked with the true highlights or the really dark, deep shadows. But you can see how if there was a branch, it comes down and then it lifts up very slightly. I like that. I like that a lot. I also know I want to do a bit more up here. So we'll have a little piece extending. And we'll take out more of this sky. I did purposefully opt for a more simple sky so that we had more opportunity to expand with our details in here without kind of overcomplicating the piece. I think that's also another just important general lesson. Sometimes you're going to want certain subjects to be less interesting so that they don't steal the attention away from your primary subjects, and this is very much a case of that. We went with a simple sky so that we could go with a highly detailed set of trees. And now I'm just going to go in, do a second layer over everything, make sure it's nice and thick, and from there, together, we will head into the nice textured detail. Now it's time to make that look a whole lot less blocky and a lot more detailed and textured like what we have over there. So using the filbert brush, we'll go back to a bit of a mix, and here we already have the darker pigment that we have on the palette that we used here. However, we're going to go even darker. We're getting closer to the foreground. That means that there's less atmospheric reflective light. It means that we're going to see more innate coloring. It means that we're going to have the darkest darks that we've rendered thus far. So I'm just kind of comparing what we have there and there on the palette, though, again, I think we need to go a little bit darker and really make this pop. So once I have a good amount of that mixed up and spread out on the palette as well, by the way, if you spread it out, it's a lot easier to pick up the correct amount with the 1/2 inch flat-headed brush. We'll go in. We'll just get the top of the brush. Again, we don't want too much paint. And now we'll head in. I'm going to start on the left-hand side and work my way over to the right with these taps, because the left-hand side is going to be the darker area. It's farther away from the light that's in there. So we want it to slowly get brighter as you move towards the right. Again, I'm rotating my brush in the air, going in with those taps, not applying too much pressure with said tap. And with that, let's get you, again, a little bit closer. So here we are, a little bit closer. Again, starting on the left-hand side. See that I'm just trying to get the majority of the paint off. And then I start moving over towards the center of the canvas. And we're going to want to go back and do this, honestly, so many times, because, again, it is those layered applications which really make it look good. I'm going to go over previously dried areas as well. Generally, when you apply some of this paint, you want to wait a little bit before you go back over that same area again, just so it has some time to dry, and you're not essentially just adding paint on top of paint and then smudging paint to the point where you don't have your little taps, but instead you're kind of stuck with globs and accumulations that you're just not really looking for. So do try to give it a little bit of time and then work your way over. We're also trying to be careful of the openings. This isn't really a pigment that we're going to want over the sky. we can have the highlights, we can have this mid value, but the darker value, this texture that we're currently applying, doesn't really make sense there. And we can always go back and, you know, add some bluish gray on top of it. However, it's just a little bit easier if we avoid it here from the beginning. And of course, we'll work this into the center, being relatively careful. I probably won't use the entirety of the brush. Here I'm just using a side of it, that way I have a bit more control. You can of course also switch to a smaller brush for this portion. And when we move down into this area, we're able to now differentiate our values and subjects a little bit better than what we were able to do previously, which is really nice. We'll make that quite a bit darker, give it some additional contrast. There we go. So far so good, looking quite nice actually. Though still very incomplete. And it won't look complete until we add the highlights. And we'll do multiple layers of highlights here. Really build it up properly. Here you can see I'm still just dancing around so many of these subjects. Still need to do the bottom, but that's also easy. That's just more of what we've been doing, right? Nothing too complicated down here. Though admittedly I may have added a little bit too much of that dark pigment. I'll just add in more highlight later on. So again, no worries. One of the wonderful things about acrylic painting is just how forgiving it is. If you mess something up, you let it dry for 5 minutes and you go back and you fix it. No real hassle. With that, I am going to switch over to the filbert brush for a minute, because while we've defined different portions of, you know, all of these little offshoots with the mid value, I want to do that as well with the darker value, because it's going to allow me to create shape and very definitive shape down here, right? So this is where we have a lot of our shadows. It's more so in the center of these clusters, because the light's wrapping around the top, the light's wrapping around the bottom a little bit, not as much. So I'll add some of these applications towards the bottom area, but for the most part, we are working this in the center. We're connecting different portions. We'll work it back into the middle here, and we'll just continue that same filbert brush tap effect. Again, different from what we were just doing with that flat-headed brush, all the texture. Here we're really building some shape and some form, but we're doing so while also adding depth through contrast. And this is something I'm going to want to move back into here. I'm trying to be a little bit more loose, a little bit more playful with it. That way, again, we don't kind of make things look predictable. So another tip you can do is you can hold the brush from a lot farther back. It'll relinquish control. And initially it's pretty daunting, admittedly. I remember being in university, taking a drawing class, and this being suggested, and I was like, but it, I don't have any control. I can't do it. And then, you know, you give it a try, you practice for a little while, and then you can. And it really is just about, you know, having faith, making it happen, believing in yourself, and you'll get there. We all do. And again, it's a great way of making your stroke more loose, because you do relinquish control, but you can build up enough that you're still getting it generally where you want. You're not accidentally going to have it in the middle of the sky, if you know what I mean. So it is okay, and I'll just work that down a little bit more. I'll also take this opportunity to add a little bit of it at the top in the larger clusters here too, just because this looked a little odd with all of this having the contrast, but that area just not. So I'll just work a little bit of it in, make sure that's three-dimensional as well. There we go. So I'm just going to finish off the bottom here, and then together we can go back in and add some branches, some of our tree trunk, and then the highlights. Now, for the majority of this lesson, we've been using this 1/2-inch flat-headed brush to do a lot of the tapping, creating the texture, and it's great for that because it has so many loose little bristles. However, we're going to be switching to a different 1/2-inch flat-headed brush. This one has more of a soft to medium bristle, so all of these stick together much better and it creates a much more consistent application. This will be great for rendering things like that of our branches or tree trunks because it can carry quite a bit of paint. There's a lot of surface area here, but this sharp edge and these corners are great for rendering the sharper edges of wood. So we'll be switching to this and heading into a brand new portion of the painting. So now we'll take that brush and we'll grab for the very first time some burnt umber, move that to a new clean spot on our palette. We'll grab some Mars Black, smallest hint of titanium white to add a little bit of gray to it, and we'll mix up a nice thick dark brown. And brown is really great actually for pieces like this because it just works so well with pinks and purples. It'll fit really naturally in with everything else. However, we do want to start with a very dark mixture, and I think what I had there was a bit too bright. So we'll go in and I'll just start tapping in all of my initial branches. I'm applying a bit more pressure down here, that way I can expand my stroke and fill in this larger area. However, when I'm kind of up at the top here, I'm not applying as much pressure. And much like the trees over on that side, the same rule of not going in and creating one singular stroke applies. We want to create multiple. We want to build it up. I have not gone in and redrawn everything because I feel like I have a pretty good memory of what it looked like. However, you are more than welcome to. We definitely did cover just about everything with all of the purple, the shadows, the texture, the previously applied 2 layers. But here, again, we'll just mix it up, make it nice and dark, and we will be going in with a brighter application to add some highlights, to add some detail, because right now, a lot of it is going to get lost in what we have. That's okay. That is part of the plan. Having portions of it get lost as it is just going to make it look more natural, because not every piece of every subject naturally is going to stick out in real life, right? So we can do that. We can also have little portions, again, just get lost between foliage. So I'll do a little bit there. We get lost there, it'll re-emerge up over here. Maybe it'll get lost again. A lot of different little actions. Here I wanted to have one go through that opening because it will be more noticeable. It's an interesting spot to put it. Here we're having some overlap, and then we can have it just kind of move back up. Again, working through those openings is a great opportunity. Really love it. I love adding the smaller branches. I find it to be such a cathartic act. But with that, I'm just going to look up at my original painting. I had another piece that kind of went through here, overlapped that branch. And again, the more you overlap, the more it looks like the branches don't just move left and right, but they also move around each other, right? They work in 3-dimensional space, and that's so important. So that is something we are continuously trying to work with. There we go. I can tell that our initial layers were also quite thin, in part because it's acrylic, but also in part because my brush is a little bit damp right now. And I do have it slightly more damp than I did previously, because the more damp it is, the more condensed your bristles are, and the easier it is to render really sharp lines, which is what we want for the edges of these, though it does come at the sacrifice of just not being able to apply a thick layer. So we make those concessions and we build it up. Here we'll work this back in. We'll also have some smaller trees in the background. We'll just lightly apply those. Don't need to do too much. Really like how this is turning out though. Definitely moving in the right direction. I'm going to take a step back. And something else that we need to do, very important, is the branches that come down from here. So I'm actually going to create a brand new branch at the top. Going to have it move down. I'm going to have it move in an arc like that. So it looks like it has some weight to it. It wants to come back up. It's trying. It has all of this to hold on to. And we'll have some little offshoots that kind of come out here and then work their way back in. There we go. I think that looks very nice. Maybe have another one just kind of sticking out. And we can always go in with our highlight and add ends to these if you'd like to. Add little small clusters of color, right? It doesn't have to end with a sharp line. Getting a little quiet here just because I'm trying to figure out this area, but I think we did that. There we go. Having just a bit more of this stick out, I think, makes it look a whole lot more natural. All of the branches aren't always going to exist within the heart of the subject, right? They are going to protrude. Some of them are going to be a little bit wonky, a little bit funny. I think I want to make it a little bit bigger, actually. And then we'll have it just kind of get lost down there. There we are. Now we have some real variety between the sizing of all of those pieces. And you can also go back in with your liner brush and create smaller little branches if you'd like. So lots of option. There we go. Now, let's get a little bit closer and add some highlights. So now we're going to switch to a fairly wet liner brush, and I say wet, but again, it's damp. We did wipe off the water so that it doesn't thin it out too much, but we're going to add some highlighted browns to these. And you know, when I said initially brown looks great with purple and pink, you probably look at this and say, where is the brown? Again, there are hints of it in there, but we'll now make it a bit more prominent. So I'll grab some of our burnt umber, move that on our palette right beside the darker pigment, so I know we're getting something similar, something nice. We'll add a little bit of Mars Black. And now we have a muted highlight. And I like this a lot. We're going to add it initially closest to the sky, to the brightest points. I'm going to apply it on the right-hand side, of course. I'm going to do these little taps with a drag. And that's going to create the actual application. And I'm going to try to create lots of little strokes. Now, as I move slightly towards the left, I let it dissipate. I'm trying to apply very little pressure so that it doesn't end up kind of getting too large, right? We know that pressure with this often makes the applications quite large. Going to be a little bit more quiet here because I don't want to move my brush too sporadically, and often talking does make painting a little bit harder. So we'll just work this down. You can see that I'm working it to the left as well. It's a highlight, but because it's so watery, it's a bit darker. We can see there's darker pigment showing through it. That actually is a benefit here because we don't want it to be too bright or highlighted. We're not really in an area where it's going to receive all that light, though you can go over it twice and you can see how it builds up that highlight. So if there is an area you feel like maybe there's an opening and it's going to catch more light because of said opening, you can just go over it again and build that up. My brush is very watery right now, so that I do get those sharp applications, but now that I'm moving farther and farther to the left, I want my applications to be thinner and thinner because I want them to be darker and darker. And the more water that's on my brush, the more thin the paint is, and therefore the darker the pigment that we end up with because you can see more of the dark pigment through it. There we go. It's all meant to be very subtle. And you can just mix a darker brown for that area if you're finding trouble with it. But you can also just do exactly what I'm doing. Now we need to work over on here. Something else you can do if you don't need to do a lot of motion is you can take your pinky finger and ground it on a dry area of canvas. And then make your strokes. And we do this to eliminate shake. It's very efficient. Now I ended up adding a lot of highlight to this, which makes it look like it's kind of all on top of the foliage. I do think that's an issue, admittedly. We can go back and add in more of the dark purple on top of it to fix it up. Or if it's wet, you can kind of just take your finger and eliminate it from that spot. In any case, it is something we can remedy, and that's great. We'll also be covering it with a lot of highlight, so there are multiple steps in making it all look better still. This isn't the final layer, and it does end up looking a whole lot better. There's one thing I want to consistently remind you about during the painting process. It's that it is a process, and you will get there. You just gotta believe in yourself. Listen to the instructions, get creative, interject your own pieces, have fun with it, take your time. You know, it'll all add up and you'll end up with something really beautiful. Okay? So, recognize that in these awkward stages, it is a-okay. There we go. Now, while I do have this brush, it's very detail oriented, I'll grab some of that Mars Black, some of our magenta, hint of titanium white, makes up a nice dark pigment, and then we can just work over different portions that we felt we may have overdone. We can do that in so many areas and really jump around with it. It will work, admittedly, slightly better if you let the branches dry fully, but it's so watery, my applications, that it doesn't matter. You can also use it to draw in extra branches. Kind of want to connect a couple of these, have it come back up like that. That's a nice one. There we go. And maybe we'll add some highlights to the end of that. I think that could be quite pretty. Just building ourselves opportunities, essentially. There we go. Okay, now we will take a step back and then we'll start working on some highlights and some details. Now, for this next step, we are going to switch back to our 1-inch flat-headed brush because, again, it can pick up a lot of paint and it's great for blending. So we'll grab a lot of our magenta, about a third of that in titanium white, a little bit of our Mars Black, and we'll mix up essentially close to the highlight that we have here, but we'll make it a little bit darker. That way we have more room to build it up. So I think this right here is actually a fantastic opening color, though we're not going to apply it with this brush. So I'll put that down. I'll pick up our fan brush yet again, dip the bottom portion in some water, wipe it off as we do, grab this nice new highlight, and then again we think about where the light is. It's coming from behind, it's coming this way. We know that the right hand side is going to be receiving a lot of that light. So we'll just start tapping that on. We'll bring it down into here. Trying to leave quite a bit of that dark portion because it really does define shape and what's happening. If we had too much light down here, it'll all blend into that, and that's an issue. Now we are closer to us in the foreground, so I am applying slightly more pressure with my taps because I want these to be larger than they have been in the past. And that's also going to help us create a little bit more depth. Altering the size of your subjects is really important in painting when you do want multiple layers of depth and something that feels like you can really explore. So we are paying a lot of attention to that, as we should. Now here, again this side very close to the light, I did note that I wanted to finish off that branch with some clusters of highlight, so I'm doing that very carefully with just one little piece of our brush. And I know you're quite far away. Again, that is intentional. This is one of those things where you do want to paint from a bit farther away, just to ensure it's all balanced, because right now that's what matters most. I'm going to leave this larger dark opening like I left that one, and we'll have this other protruding piece that has more highlight to it. Go back along that edge, build that up as we will a number of times. And now that I don't have much paint on my brush, I can kind of fill in these darker areas a little bit with something that's slightly more subtle. Really love how this is turning out. We've been quite patient with it, building it up, and it's starting to pay off. However, again, these aren't even our real highlights. We're going to build up even more. We're going to have that extra detail. Currently finding all of the open areas, by the way, and just applying some of our highlight right behind them because the light's coming through. It will illuminate the back area of them. There we go. Can get darker as we move inwards. And if you feel like you cover up too much of the branches, also don't worry about that. We can always go back and add more. More of the branches, that is. We're obviously going to go back in and add more highlights, as we've talked about. So here is where I do need to start getting really careful because I'm adding everything in and I'm really liking it, but it's easy to overdo. So this is where we start taking some breaks. We take some steps back, we think about it, we say, okay, you know what? We're gonna have more right here. That looks nice. There's a bit of a flow, but it's lightly broken up in a couple of areas, so it's not hyper predictable, which is again something we tend to avoid in our paintings. I wanted to connect the top and the bottom a little bit, so I expanded upon this cluster, and then I can kind of zigzag back up. But I like that this area is darker. It's almost like there's this larger mass of them, and then there's more of a rolling opening down here. And you can tell that this has a lot less of the dark showing than the top, and that's intentional. I do want to fill in a little bit more just to give it that extra texture, but only when, again, my brush is starting to run out of paint. But that's definitely ideal. It's also worth noting, when I look at this, I realize that there really should be a lot of light coming down in this middle area, and this pigment is quite close to what we used, so we can probably just go back in here and brighten up this bottom area. And by doing so, I can brighten up this portion, which will make this stand out even more because there's a greater contrast now. There we go. It really does look like there's more of a distance. And because it's so far away, you can even do multiple layers to the point where it'll take out detail, because it'll start creating this larger amalgamated cluster. And that also isn't a bad thing in the distance. So I'm just going to go over this a couple of times to show you. And then, it does get more separated here in the foreground, as it should. So, really quick, easy tip. I think that looks great. It definitely makes this look farther away than this, simply because of its lack of detail, and it makes sense because it's farther away, it should get more light. One of those things that, again, I wasn't comfortable doing until we did portions of this, but now that we have as much of this in, I think it's quite evident that that was definitely the play. So, all of that as well. Want to do a little collection of these down here. Maybe I'll paint some branches in between them. Though I do feel like there's this larger dark opening that I don't love. So we'll expand upon this a little bit more. Maybe connect it through the right hand side. And then we'll also just do a little splash of them right up here, so that again there isn't this massive opening that doesn't really have too much context to it. Doesn't have too much going for it. So there, I feel like it makes sense. Looks nice. Going to take a step back. Now it's time to continue brightening. So back to our flat-headed brush. More titanium white, more magenta. We do still need Mars black, but we will grab less of it. And here, you can see there's such a contrast. That's why we're leaving so much room, so that we can continue to build. Grab that. Going to head up to the most important parts, and this is really the main subject, this draping piece here. And then I'm going to find the larger clusters, and I'll apply this to the right hand side of them, because again that's where the light's coming from. We'll just slowly build it all up. Not doing too much in any one point at a time either, because I really want to vary it and ensure that I'm not overdoing it in any one spot. It's definitely starting to look more natural. The highlight, I think, is the correct move. However, initially it will look a little awkward because wherever you put it, it's just going to stand out so much more, and it's not going to be natural until we start the balancing process, which we have, which is bringing it together. And let's try adding a little bit of that in the distance, not too much. We'll add it to the top there. Yeah, that looks really nice. Okay. Let's add a little bit over here. Again, we have to be careful because we don't want it to make the background take away from the trees in the foreground, but I can tell that we have some leeway. So I'm just kind of doing light tests to figure out how much exactly we have. Really did a lot for the background, actually. That's nice. Just looks better and better. Okay. You know what? We'll grab more. Head back in. And now I'm really going to jump around in the painting, because we just have so much opportunity and option in terms of where we're applying it. I'm going to add a little bit to the bottom portion because the light will come down and wrap around it, but not as much. The middle area really should be the darkest, but the top has the most priority of light, and then the bottom will have a little bit. Just going to use one little piece for some real detail work, almost as if it's a liner brush. And now yet again, grab our flat-headed brush, more titanium white, more magenta, and we just keep getting brighter. Now this is something we do have to be careful with, as it's getting to the point of being, you know, some of the brightest potential pigment, but definitely does give us some real opportunity. So apply that at the top there. Apply this at the top here. And you know what? I think this area should remain where it's at because it's going to have the shadow of this, but the background can have more light. So we're actually going to make the background lighter in the painting. As you can see. Again, not a decision that, not something I was willing to commit to while we were working on this area initially, but now that we have our contrast, now that it's coming together, we can see where it's going. I think that this is definitely a good call. And it just goes to show how paintings can evolve, how your decision trees open up. There we go. Can add a bit more of it along the side here, the areas that are really going to be receiving a lot of light, but not too much, because it is now reserved for a couple of very particular spots, right? With that, we've been painting for quite some time, and I think I'm going to look at the monitor. Yeah, okay, 13 minutes of pure painting, which means I should definitely take a 2-minute break, step back from the piece and make sure that it is coming together. I can take a couple of steps back, but while I'm on camera, I think I'm a little limited. So I'm going to practice what I've been telling you to do the whole time. I'm going to put the paintbrush down, I'm going to take those steps back, and I'm going to look at it. And I'm going to keep saying that until I do, because sometimes it's just so hard to stop painting. It's just so much fun. I'm not even kidding. I'm really enjoying myself and I don't want to stop. We'll just do a couple more taps. And then I will do what I'm saying you should do as well. You ever have moments like this? I keep seeing areas that I can improve. Now, something I realized after taking some steps back, this area just became far too blocky with foliage. I wanted more of the sky showing through. So I'm switching to the smaller liner brush, grabbing more of the color that we used for our sky. And I'm just going to paint in some little openings. Going to be wary of where my branches are. Might connect areas. And now this is really open. You can see that large branch. I think that looks really pretty. Can work around another branch right here. Just kind of redevelop a couple of these different features that aren't just the pinks and purples, right? And I think this will go a long way. You can also reshape the edges so that they're a bit more diverse, a bit more interesting. Though, make sure you definitely go over your areas a couple of times, because we did initially do the sky a couple of times and we'll hypothetically be painting this over fairly dark pigment, right? So we do just want to make sure that we're fairly careful with it. I think I might take out this larger area altogether. Again, goes to show that acrylics are very, very malleable. Make a lot of changes if you want to. Things don't go perfectly the first time, and they rarely do, which is one of the reasons why I personally love this medium. Creating a larger opening in there, I think that's pretty fun. And then here is where that ends up being, so we essentially lose our shot at doing more of the sky, so I'm just going to make the most of it right up until this point. Yeah, I think the openings really do a lot for it. It's definitely needed variance in this larger wall of similar pigment, and you can go in and even change the backing area if you'd like. I think that actually helped a lot too. Yeah. The channel is called Stay Creative for a reason. We're always just making these little alterations and learning, growing, getting better at what we do. Right? Really loving it though. Really coming together. There we go. Kind of have little pieces flying off. I like that. Just kind of in the air. It's different. It doesn't require the same rules of form as everything else. Just opening things up. So we added quite a bit of sky, and I think that did a lot to help just kind of give it an interesting form. However, there's more we can do. We're going to take our Mars Black, Burnt Umber, a little bit of Titanium White, mix that together quite well, again, so that we don't have some areas that are brown, some white that are some are black. Make our brush nice and damp. Grab more of that pigment, and then we can follow some of the more prominent branches and ensure that they do move on top of the foliage, because remember, we want a balance. We want some of the tree to be in front, some of the tree to be behind. It's going to vary from branch to branch and even different portions of the branches, but I definitely think form is what's needed here. Distinct movements, because again, we have a lot of the same tapping effect. So I'm just re-instigating some of the tree. Now we'll go in for a highlight, Burnt Umber, Titanium White, mix that with a bit of the Mars Black. Just bring that all together. Go towards that right-hand side for the most part. And just start bringing that in. It's blending currently with the darker pigment I just applied because we didn't wait for it to dry. So it's making all of my applications a little bit more subtle, and I'm very much okay with that. We can always brighten these if we need to, but having that nice blend from the start, it is desired. I think that the line work in here is really pulling a lot of weight, bringing it back together. So many little things we can do to make it our own and really have fun with the process. Again, I just had such a hard time putting down the brush and taking some steps back, because it's just, there's so much to do and it's so much fun to do. That area right there is definitely too large. Grab some Mars Black and we'll just paint over it. Nice and easy. Never really an issue. Add some extra highlight and saturation to the brown. Build up a couple of areas that we feel like might get some extra light. Not all of it. Just a couple of selected pieces. Now for our next step, we're going to play with a different color and head right down to the bottom left area. Now we're going to have some ground which transitions out into a series of rocks. We'll of course have more of the pink and purple kind of scattered throughout here, but I do want to interject another color which has been worked in a little bit through the trees. So we'll take our filbert brush, we'll grab quite a bit of our burnt umber, we'll grab a little bit of our titanium white, about an equal amount of Mars Black to the burnt umber. That should render a fairly dark, nice earthy pigment. And then I'm just going to head down here, work my way into our purple applications, and I'm doing that through horizontal strokes which eventually just stop, implying that they kind of get lost behind our last application. And we'll just have that move up, and then it gets covered. You can see the rocks drawn on these sides. We'll have it kind of dip in and out so the water can have a bit more space. Trying to go in with a fairly thick application, but I definitely will need to do multiple. This, like really all of our other subjects, is just the base layer. And we'll just bring it to right about there for now. Going to smooth it out, though we are going to want to interject different horizontal applications. And while we're here, we might as well just make it slightly brighter and do a very minor version of it over on the left-hand side here. Again, just letting it kind of trail off. But the majority of this will be covered with rock soon. There we go. Now, next step is to let it dry, do a second layer, and then we'll head back in with some mid values and some highlights. Now that our paint has fully dried, we're going to stick with that filbert brush, and we're going to consider, again, the light is coming down this way, it's going to expand out that way, and so the edges are essentially going to have more light than the back areas, and the back areas are also going to have shadows from things like that. So, we're going to grab more of our burnt umber, grab our titanium white, and this time significantly less of the Mars black, but still a little bit. We do want something not hyper saturated. This is really meant to accent the piece, give it a little bit of extra color, but not too much. Now I'm going to go in to the ground, and I'm just going to do these little tapping motions, as you can see, and it's going to create little pieces that move upwards, that catch a light. It shows variance in the level on the ground, and then it also creates the effect of shadow. I'll get you a lot closer though. So as you can see, it's rather subtle. I'm going in with a bit of a movement where I just tap, move up, and then back. And sometimes just a tap will do it, depending upon how you position your brush. I'll go back over a couple areas to thicken them. But the idea here is just to create a nice brown to give the painting a little bit more life. Add some extra different detail that we haven't really been able to incorporate. We haven't really worked with this texture yet, right? And we're letting it dissipate as we move towards the left-hand side, because of course that's where everything gets a lot darker. Though as you move farther and farther away, these details start to dissipate. I'm not looking for as much of a contrast. So I'm filling in areas. I'm being a bit more soft with my touch. I'm not trying to be as sharp as I once was. But we'll still bring some of these back. There we go. Now, I'm going to wet my brush. Grab more titanium white. Brighten it up. Go back in and just continue adding highlights to the areas that you feel are going to be a little bit higher. It's a real process, just balancing. And then inevitably connecting different portions if you want to flatten it a little bit. That is something I want to do. We can make it hyper complicated, we can have it with all these different levels and divots, but I do think this is something that can be a bit more simple. And again, painting is not always about just adding more and more detail. It's about figuring out where the detail should be, where you want the viewer's attention. And this is a fun little path on the side, but I don't want it to be too much more than that. I don't want it to be too distracting. Now I'm going in with a fairly watery application, which is very thin, but at this point that doesn't matter because I already have my base layers on there. And this is just about sharpening different portions that I want. There we go. Took a little while, but we're finally getting there. Just don't want it to look too dramatic. Now let's head on over to the other side. Now this side is a lot smaller and therefore will be quite a bit easier. We'll grab our burnt umber, titanium white, a little bit of our Mars black, mix up a darker variant, but again not as dark as what we already have applied. We'll start on the edges, we'll work our way back. Keep it really simple here. We don't want to overdo it, overcomplicate it. I might cover all of the darker pigment in the back though, because again we do want it to be more stark in the foreground, and this pigment is definitely less stark than what we had down on the base layer. We'll just do a little bit of a blend. Wet the brush, grab some titanium white, and then we'll go in with that tap effect, but it is farther away so we don't want to do too much of this. I'll just let it dissipate as I move back, and this will be my only application for the area. And we're done. Nice and easy. Now we'll take that same filbert brush, again make sure it's a little bit damp, grab some Mars black, and we'll start creating a base layer for the rocks along the shore. Now we'll also use a little bit of brown for this, but significantly less than what we were using previously for the rest of our ground. And we are going to apply these along the sides, recognizing that we're probably going to have to redo a fair portion of them, because when we're doing the water we're going to overlap this. But I do want to get a good idea for kind of my sizing, where everything's going to be. This is essentially going to act as a practice round for us, and again that's always so useful. Nothing really is hyper finite when working with acrylics, and you might as well use opportunities like this to ensure that you're really going to put time into doing exactly what you want to do. Because here, we can layer these rocks on really quickly, as we are going to, and see if they're kind of spaced out the way we want, if they progressively change size in the way that we want them to. Because again, they should get smaller as they move back, to ensure that we're not consistently creating the same shape of rock as well, right? That's important. We do want variance, and here you can see the cut-in is the same between those two. That's an issue. So we'll extend this one out, make it into a bit of a larger rock, set of rocks here. You can see that it does get bigger as you move into the foreground. And then I'll move it right off the corner here. So, progressively gets larger, changes shape minorly. It's very dark. And of course we want to do a couple layers to make sure it's nice and thick. That said, the rocks won't just be on the outskirts, so we can also work some over the actual ground if we'd like to. And these are essentially guaranteed because we aren't going to be putting the water onto these. They're pretty solidified unless we want to repaint the ground on them. You might also want to use your liner brush for really small ones, but I think that's good for the general shape and what we want to do. Now I'll head over to the other side. And again, this won't be too complicated. We'll just keep things changing. I think we'll have one rock that kind of connects to a couple other rocks and moves out there. I like that a lot. There are going to be rocks all the way along the edge. Sometimes moving in, sometimes not. Again, we're also going to be taking some of our purples and pinks and layering them down on top. But that'll happen a little bit later on. Don't want to do too much far back there because, again, I don't want that hyper stark pigment all the way back there. We'll also put rock in there. Now you kind of have these two pathways along the edge that look really nice. So with that, I'll go ahead and do a second layer on each once they dry, and then we'll head into the next step, which won't be the detail on them because there isn't much point doing the detail until the water is done, because then we can apply said detail and know that we're not going to have to cover it up and redo it. We wanted the base of the rocks, general idea, we have it, I like it, and again, we'll be on to the next step. Now we're going to switch back to the 1-inch flat-headed brush because we have a lot of canvas to cover. Now we're going to start working on the base layer of our water, but before we do that we need to consider what color the water is going to be. It generally is a reflection of what's above it. Here we have a lot of trees which can reflect down into it, and then we have the more bluish white sky which can come through here, but it's also worth noting that the water is almost always a little bit darker in its reflection than what it is representing. So we need to go with a bit of a darker purple, and then I also want quite a bit of a darker blue, and then we'll go in with some really nice detailed highlights. So again, 1-inch flat-headed brush. We'll start by grabbing some of our magenta, actually quite a bit because again we do have a lot to cover here. We'll grab about half that in Mars Black, and then again half that in Titanium White, and this should render a fairly dark but relatively desaturated purple. I like that a lot. I think we're going to go in for a test. Might be too saturated, might not be dark enough. Those are kind of my preliminary thoughts here. We're not really working off of a reference photo, we're working off of the traceable, which helps with the drawing process, but I don't have an image to match colors to, so we're kind of figuring it out as we go. Whatever just seems natural, right? So we'll apply this, sharply cutting along the edges, and then I drag down, just so we can see what it's going to look like. Use the corner around these edges, but again, this is not a hard subject to repaint in, so don't worry about it too much. Then we'll just move all of that way. I'm going to take a step back, and I do think it's too saturated. So, what do we do about that? Well, first of all, we add some more Mars Black because I know I do want it to be darker. And we'll add a hint of Titanium White because it will mix with that black and make it more of a gray. Now we'll go in with this new pigment. Of course, we'll get a blend of what's already on the canvas and what's on our palette, not just the color on our palette, and that is important to remember. I know I often see situations where people are painting and they have a great color on their palette and they go to apply it and then it looks different on the actual canvas and they're wondering, why is that? And it's because either the pigment is semi-transparent and you can see the layer underneath it, the colors kind of permeating from that, or the colors on the canvas are still just wet, and then we get a combination of the palette and the painting. Not difficult to fix, but just good to be aware of, right? Here in the foreground, I'm letting it get a little bit darker. And I am painting over all of the drawn on rocks. Again, we can always rework those in. The first application is really just to figure things out. Trying not to stop my brush strokes, kind of while the brush is on the canvas, because then you do get stop marks like that, or like that. So I try to go as far as I can, even if that means going over the rocks a little bit. So now we kind of find ourselves in an interesting spot. The middle again needs to be more blue, so we'll take this pigment and we'll just work it off to the side here. Going to do a lot of the cutting in while I have fresh pigment on my brush, because that's when you can get the sharpest lines, and then when I start running out of paint, I start to move more into this central area. However, I do want to start working a little bit more quickly because I don't want all of this to dry. So, grab slightly more water. We'll work that along the edge. And I think that's where it can stop. So, now we need something for the sky. Grab our ultramarine blue. Move that down here. Grab some Mars black. About, again, half what we're using in blue. Same with titanium white. Makes it a nice, almost foggy blue. And we'll work that in. Again, we want our reflection to be fairly dark, certainly darker than what it's reflecting. This will allow our highlights to come in and look really beautiful. And I'm just blending up into that purple, going back and forth. You can also use an X-shaped pattern to drag the blue up and down. And now as you move more into the foreground, we'll make it slightly more blue. But we definitely need more paint, so we will grab the other pigments as well. And I'm trying to do all of this wet into wet, as you can see, rather than letting it dry and then doing a wet into dry blend. However, don't stress too much about it if you have to do wet into dry. Just make sure your brush is a little bit more damp when you go in to apply that second color, and everything should be a-okay. We might end up doing that here anyway. I'm not sure if I'll be able to get a full application before it dries, but you know, we're giving it a go. See what we can make happen here. This might be a little bit too bright, but again, being a bit exploratory with this one. Bringing the light up, bringing the dark down, finding that nice gradient. Oh, I think that's actually a really beautiful color. Yeah, I'm not working off a reference photo. Well, I say that. I am kind of working off a reference photo. I have a reference photo that's very green, but it's this composition. And I've done that painting before and I loved it, which is why we ended up doing this again. Just different palette, a few different techniques, but the green isn't all that useful. However, the reference photo is just to see different detail and things like that. So up over on Patreon where I'm posting the traceables, I will also post the reference photo for not the cherry trees, but the original trees and where this composition came from. Because that information is still pretty useful. There we go. Of course, often we like to do our 2 layers, but I'm just smoothing that out. And I think that this side is definitely too bright. Either that or we need to make that side brighter as well. I'm going to take a couple steps back. It's tough. I think that maybe all of it could be a little bit brighter. Let's try that. Might as well. I'm going to take more of that blue, a very bright blue. Start moving it up. You can see that right here I'm running into a bit of an issue. It's starting to rip the paint off the canvas because it didn't fully dry, but it was getting close and there's some water. It's a little risky. If we go over that again, we have to go over it with a lot of paint, or we have to let it fully dry and then go back in. I think we're going to apply a lot of paint. Mars Black, Titanium White, Ultramarine Blue. We're feeling brave today. More Ultramarine Blue. Need to make it a little bit darker because we're not super close to us anymore. So we'll add some extra Mars Black. Working with very simple palettes in this lesson, which is honestly quite fun. I like when we can kind of focus on composition and more of just the feeling. I find when you work with very limited palettes, you have a real opportunity to play with atmosphere to a very deep level, where you don't always when you're working with just a myriad of colors. Okay. I think that brightening it up was definitely the right play. Really starting to like this. I'm going to grab a little bit of our purple, a little bit of our blue, combine them together as we get towards the top here. Yeah, that is 100 times better. Now, I do think I'll need to do another layer, but I definitely need to let this dry. I was able to apply enough paint to get that area done the way I wanted, but it's still a little bit thin. More layers are generally better. So we'll give this about 10 minutes to be extremely safe. I'll do another layer, and then we'll come back in with the next step. Now we're going to be switching back to the Filbert brush, as the 1 inch was definitely too large to work on our rocks. So, as always, we're going to make sure our brush is nice and damp. Then we'll head over to the palette, grab quite a bit of our Mars Black, a little bit of the Burnt Umber, maybe about half that in Burnt Umber. We don't want it to have a lot of color, but we do want it to have a little bit. And then just a hint of Titanium White, because we do want this to be a nice dark base layer we can build on top of if we'd like to. Now, I am going to take my pinky, ground it, and then we'll start working along our edges. And I think a lot of us will feel inclined initially to start filling in the middle and have fun with that. But again, when you have fresh paint, when you've just dipped your brush in a little bit of water, you have the best opportunity to render the sharpest and most controlled lines. So, I like to begin by working on all of those edges, and then when I start to lose pigment, when I no longer feel like I have a lot of control, I go back in and I fill in the rest, as you can see we are doing right here. Now we have a lot of rocks. The goal was to ensure that they were all varied, quite different, evolving in different clusters. You can see that they overlap, 3 of them there to a different extent. This one is the smallest. They all have their own little unique pieces, and that's really, really important throughout this process. We've put a lot of time into everything else, so don't don't kind of just put on whatever shape naturally comes. Do put a little bit of thought into it. And of course, you can get the reference photo up over, you can get the reference photo, but you can also get the traceable up over on Patreon, where I have the rocks laid out a little bit different, but I really like the composition up there as well. One of those situations where I have a couple of different ideas, and again, you are more than welcome to go and download that up over on Patreon. You can also get all of my ebooks, including Acrylics for Beginners, which is essentially the essentials, everything you need to know about acrylic painting before we jump into our first acrylic painting. We talk about glazing, compositions, how to mix our colors, what brushes to use, how to work with water, about blending different pigments, what colors kind of work well together, what don't work well together. Lots of fun stuff. So check that out up there if you're interested. There are also a bunch of ebooks full of traceables, 4 days where you want to make something but you're not totally sure what you want to create. Gives you a starting point, gives you that line work, gives you a bunch of different options. Up there you can also get access to our private Facebook group where a lot of us share our artwork, talk about it, kind of grow and get better together. it's pretty neat because you see all of these different renditions of very similar pieces, right? And you can see how people kind of interject their own ideas, how they can, really improve on these lessons. So that's also really fun. I love checking in there and just seeing what the community is accomplishing. And again, you can get the reference photos, the traceables, bonus lessons. So if you're interested, there's a link in the video description. It's also just a great way to support the channel, to say thank you if you feel like you're enjoying, you're learning things. But also, if you can't, no worries at all. I do just appreciate you being here, being a part of the community, making it this far into the lesson. I think that we've been painting for quite a while now. So, regardless, thank you for being here. And I would like to say really, really big thank you to everybody who is up over on Patreon supporting the channel, making these lessons happen, because as I say in all of these, there's no way I could spend as much time on these lessons as I do and make these multi-hour lessons, these detailed pieces, if it wasn't for the support up there, for everybody keeping the lights on, as we like to say. So thank you, truly, for making this happen, because it literally could not without you. And I love making these lessons. I love that different people all around the world can learn from them, and that we can, together kind of keep traditional art alive and exciting. So thank you. truly thank you. Always very honored and humbled to know that there's a real community who believes in these and who wants more lessons, and it's always just amazing to be up on there and see the support. So thank you to everybody who does support the channel directly, and thank you to, again, everybody who's just watching along. Here we are filling in all of those rocks, and we will be for a little while. There are quite a few. It's okay though, we're taking our time. That said, when I'm done with the foreground rocks, and maybe some of the middle ground rocks, we're going to switch to the liner brush, because this one is simply too large for the background areas. They're pretty tiny after a point, right? And we don't want to kind of accidentally make them all too large, because we just didn't feel like switching out our brush. We have the brushes, might as well use them and get the best results possible, right? Again, we're nearing the end of the lesson, the end of the painting. We still have a lot to do, don't get me wrong, but we've put so much time in already that we really just want to continue to end strong, continue to make it the best piece we can, something we're truly proud of, something we really enjoy looking at. I think that on these long painting sessions, a lot of us, and myself included, when I was really starting, you spend all this time and you say, I'll just do this and this, and it's all going really well. I can kind of hurry that portion, and it's almost never the way. So we'll put the time in, we'll do it right, and we'll have a great time doing it. So here, we're just going to continue moving up, and I can already tell this is an area where I'm probably going to go back and touch up with the liner brush just a little bit. The rocks over here on the right hand side are a bit bigger, so we have some opportunity yet again. And we'll bring that over to our sand. This rock's pretty neat. It has more of a cliff-like piece to it. Like that. It's different than the general slope we see. Running out of paint, so we'll just kind of fill that in. Grab some more water. Continue to mix. And it's a very easy mix because we are just working on a base layer. Have to love it. We do have a rather large spot up here, which can be in the end, a collection of rocks, right? All of which overlapping. At this point, it's just silhouetted, so we really have a lot of freedom when it comes to instilling the detail work a little bit later down the road. There we are. Going to take a step. That's looking good. I'm very happy. Okay, I'm going to do one more. Yes, just this last one. We'll get you closer, and we'll switch to the liner brush. So, yet again, a little bit closer with said liner brush. We're grabbing the same pigment we were working with previously, grounding my hand with my pinky finger, and just painting in these very small rocks in the distance. They are, of course, actually not that small. They're rather big, like the ones we have in the foreground. However, because of perspective, they definitely look a lot smaller. Though that isn't an excuse to not give some of them some fun detail, overlap them, do all of the things we were doing in the foreground, right? We can't give them the same level of texture because we just wouldn't see it from the distance, but we can still give them some intricate movements and make them worth looking at, investigating visually. Kind of have the rocks go up onto some of the ground there. I think that's fun. Rather than just having it be an outline around that, you know, actually working some of these into that back area is a fun call. Make it feel more cohesive with the rest of the piece. You can make the piece very cohesive through, you know, a litany of factors, litany of ways, but that's just another one. Lots of little rocks at the back there. And I actually want to fill up the majority of the back with smaller rocks. I didn't draw them all in because I wanted to kind of feel out how it was looking with the minimal amount of drawn in ones that I had. And then I figured we'd expand on it together. Much like the highlights right above in the purples and pinks, I didn't want to kind of commit early to it. I wanted to feel it out, and this is a very similar situation. And that's okay. There we go. So, we filled in all that we had to. But do a little touch up there, and then I'll just continue adding more of these. And the whole idea here is that we have a bit of a line. Going for general clusters, here's an opening. And by creating clusters and openings, you create noticeable diversity, which is nice, rather than having them all equally spaced apart from one another. This one's going to be quite long. Yeah. And now we have this nice open spot to have some movement in the water as well. There we go. Now, I really like what we have. However, as per usual, one layer is not enough. And I don't think you need to watch me repaint these for another 15 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and just do a second layer on everything that we did. And then I will see you for the next step. Now that we have the silhouettes in there, we need to add some texture. So we'll take our filbert brush, grab some of our titanium white, our Mars black, mix that up to be a bit of a darker gray, but we'll also throw in a hint of blue as well, so it's nice and cool. Then, put said brush down, pick up yet again the 1/2 inch flat-headed brush, which again is a bit more disheveled. So, we'll grab our newly mixed paint, and we'll tap on some texture. However, as you can see, the pigment we mixed was far too dark. So, back to the drawing board. Mix up a brighter variant. Again, I do want blue. This is quite a bit brighter than our last, but again, we do have to account for the fact that we are applying it over black, or almost black, and therefore we're going to get a darker pigment than what's on our palette. So here, going in, tapping in the texture, already like it. We will clean this up with the liner brush a little bit later, but this is a really easy way of getting a lot of detail on here quite quickly. And typically I'm trying to cover the top area of our rock, or the areas that are going to be most exposed to the light. Let's get you a little bit closer. So now, going back to our palette, head in towards the top of our rock, and then work our way down. We can do that for the smaller ones. If we accidentally get it over the water, we can add some movement to the water later on. Make it a bit more subtle. As we will want little splashes and things of that nature down there, which can also be represented through quite similar texture. I'm also not afraid of kind of doing too much with this, because it's really easy to kind of carve out portions, and we're going to be doing a lot of that together relatively soon. So this is going to, admittedly, make it look a little messy. It's going to look a little fuzzy. It's not really going to have an aesthetic that we'll love initially, but it'll get us to an important place. And that's important to remember. So much of acrylic painting is initially not so aesthetic base layers, which eventually, inevitably, add up to something we really love and value. It's really the practice of putting in time and effort and being rewarded for it. Okay. I think this side is looking quite nice. I don't want to go too far back with the texture, just because, again, we won't see that detail that far back. So we're going to head over to the left-hand side. So, heading back, grabbing more of that highlight. Work that on the top. Work that all the way back over here. And we have a lot to play with. The silhouette is rather large. And I think in those scenarios, when you're not really sure what you want to do, particularly with this subject and this technique, just cover all of it, and then we can work reductively in the next step to kind of make it what you want it to be. It's a lot like sculpting, where painting is very different in that you're adding and you're building, but you can also work as if you're sculpting, and it's the process of taking away. Often, these mediums become a lot easier to work with when you kind of think about them in that broad sense. What you're actually trying to achieve on a larger scale, rather than painting a rock or water, anything of that nature, right? Actually figuring out the larger goal and process, it does help. That said, this is all coming together. I can tell my paint is starting to dry. It's getting a little tacky. You can hear it. But it should be enough to finish. There we go. Okay, now I'm going to wait 2 minutes, let all of this dry, then we'll come back and continue working on it. Now, I know I just said that we are going to move in the process of working more reductively, kind of taking out portions of that, but upon kind of sitting down, resonating with it, I think the best play is actually to continue adding highlights, but ones that dictate form, and then we work reductively once we know what we really want to keep, if that makes any sense. So we're going to switch to the liner brush. We're going to mix up the exact same color. It has since dried on my palette, so we'll just make a new variant, and we can make it slightly brighter than what we had, but really try to limit that. And then I'm going to go to the tops of my rocks and the sides that are facing the light, and I'm going to do a little tap, a little drag. I'm going to work my brush inwards, and we can start defining light on that rock in a much larger way. I'm using very little pressure. I want my markings to be small. Here you can see there's a bit of a dip, and then there's more of a horizontal plane that can catch light. Maybe we'll do another one. And now you can see that there's this little fissure, another one, and that's something we can further define a little bit later with the reductive process. Heading over here, again starting at the top. One of the things you really want to look out for in this process is not accidentally leaving almost the black silhouette on the top and then having the highlight. Even if there's the smallest portion, even a millimeter, it does take away from a clean professional look, so do try quite hard to ensure that that doesn't occur. I, by the way, love painting rocks. This is something that I could do for hours, like honestly, actually hours. So I'm going to be a little bit more quick with it, just so that you don't have to watch me paint them for that period of time. But know that you really can take your time. You don't have to be this quick. You can really just enjoy the process. Show that each rock is a little bit different. Now I'm starting to apply it to the right hand side rather than the left hand side of a rock, because I am on the left hand side of the painting, and the light is going to be hitting it in a different way from a different direction. Taking a quick step back, starting to look really nice. However, it definitely looks overly detailed for our water, but I do intend to add a lot of detail to our water, so that actually isn't an issue. But if we weren't going to add it, that is something that one would need to consider. Brush is very watery right now. And I did that for two reasons. One, I want a very clean, sharp stroke that I have a lot of control over. You know, all of the bristles are tightly kept together because of that water. But also because I wanted something semi-transparent that was going to be subtle. We can build this all up so easily by doing extra layers, but I don't want my initial applications to be hyper bold. And when it's this subtle, you really can change things very easily. So I'm probably using more water in my mix right now than I have throughout the entirety of the painting. Let's get you a little bit closer. So this is all an area we are yet to paint. We're going to start defining the top of this rock as we do. Lots of little taps and drags, not one continuous stroke. That same general rule applies that we instigated earlier in the trees. Again, as minimal pressure as possible. I look for the larger highlights within the tapped aspects of the rock, and then I accentuate those. Let's grab a little bit more water again. Having it semi-transparent and very sharp are real assets here. And I really, really liked this rock a lot. Has this shelf-like effect. Can drop down there, can drop down here. You kind of have this fissure in the middle. That's really unique. Okay. Grab a bit more. And continue working our way back in the painting. Now, as we do move farther and farther back, we can do more elongated strokes rather than all of the little taps and drags, because again, we do lose that detail. We just can't see it. We do not have that ability. It's too far away. So we do want to simplify to a point, but I'm going to make my mix a little bit darker as well, just so it's a bit more subtle. And we don't want it to look like we're just outlining our rocks. So we're going to still skip little areas, skip rocks entirely. Some of them will reflect differently, right? Different things to consider. But I think it's all turning out quite nice. Here we're back to the foreground, so lots of little taps. And again, this will all look a whole lot more natural when we have the water in here too. All of the movements working their way around these rocks, having it all work together. With that, I think I'll spend a couple more minutes just going over things again, doing little fix-ups, little defining pieces, but in the off chance that I spend 50 minutes on it and it probably doesn't look much different at all, I'll turn off the camera and then I will see you for the next step. Again, I like to keep these as real time as I can. I like to show you as much of the process as I can, but there are some things, and this is probably the first time in this painting, that are just very repetitive and very much the same, and there isn't really too much to add, too much to teach after a certain point. So kind of give you my tips and tricks for it, and now at this point I'm just going to tap and drag on the canvas for, ideally 15 minutes, but maybe more like 40. You never know. We actually don't have that much to do. I'm definitely overestimating, but I've definitely had that sort of thing happen with this particular subject before, and you can see that I keep going back to previous rocks that were done, could be done, but could also, have a little bit more highlight here, a little bit of a darker pigment there. We do need to work reductively through these, though. And that'll be a fun task very soon. So, as an update, that only actually took me about 10 minutes, but I don't think it was 10 minutes you really needed to see. That said, we are now going to work on the next step, which is removing the extra. Still going to go in with that same liner brush. We're going to go in with the dark pigment that we initially used for the base layer, so a lot of Mars Black, a little bit of blue, a little bit of titanium white, arguably a little bit more Mars Black now. We do want it to be quite dark. We'll make it fairly watery. And then we'll find areas that may have gotten too overcomplicated, or we want to add little breaks in them. This rock is a great example. Doing it a little bit from afar initially, just so you can see how subtle it is. The type of change we're making. But now we have this little piece of the rock that kind of extends and then it goes inwards here and here. You can also make more of that rock dark. And we'll do the same to this rock, or at least something similar, just so you can get the idea, but I'll get you up close for it. So we're going to go ahead, grab more of that pigment, And we're going to separate this into 3 pieces by taking this pigment, going in with a little bit of a tap. Now you can see this is separated from that. We're separated at the top, separated on the side. Maybe we'll break the top and the bottom piece apart. Now it's 3 little protruding areas. I think it's much more interesting. Go back, grab a little bit more. Say, okay, you know, we can accentuate this one and this break, and we can accentuate this break. And now that's much more notable. We can go into here, break it apart in a couple of spots as well. Again, looking for unique ways of doing it. Though I think that looks a little too human-made. Maybe just a crack in the middle and then one on the side. Yeah, that looks nice. I think it just looked too symmetrical. Different things to look out for. Grab some extra Mars black. Separating a top portion over there. Just break this into a couple little shelves. This one, we can do a lot. Break that into 3 pieces. I like that. It's nice. And I don't want to overdo it with this, but it definitely does give us an opportunity to reshape if we'd like, to add extra detail, to simplify. There's a lot of opportunity a technique like this offers. Now this next up is also a lot of fun. We will be using the smaller liner brush, and we'll start by grabbing some titanium white, small amount of Mars black. We don't want it to be a pure white. In fact, we want it to be a lighter side of gray with a hint of blue. So we'll start with something like this. Make sure our brush is nice and wet. We do want very sharp strokes, and if our paint is fairly transparent, that's also not an issue because it's something we want to do multiple layers of. But it's time to start working on the water and the movement. So I'm going to start right around these rocks by going on the bottom of them and working my way around to show that there is movement. And then we're going to start creating some of that movement. So the water is going to continue moving, and I'm going to start to create lines, essentially, little pathways. And I want to begin yet again from a bit of a distance so you can see large scale the idea of what we're doing, and then I'll get you up close for the technique. But here, I'm moving it out towards the right, and then there's going to be a shift that brings us more back towards the left. And I want my strokes to be incredibly small, sharp. And then we come to this larger opening, and this is where it can really expand. It'll work its way around that rock. It'll work its way around the bottom of this rock. But then it'll have this really nice open area. And I'm trying to make my strokes fairly loose while still having enough control to make them small. There we go. This is going to be the detail that balances the rest of our rocks and everything that we have going on, the texture. Going to go over a couple areas numerous times to build them up once I know I like them. and we'll also work it right down here. There we go. I think we'll have it kind of break apart in this spot and also go to the right, but not as prominently. We still want those movements, but we can do it in a much more subtle way, and we can also work our way around a lot of these rocks to further decide what portions we want to have more detail and what portions we don't. Getting a little bit quiet through here just because it's something that I'm consistently having to think about. It's not kind of doing the same thing. It's similar motions, but it's consistently changing why we're moving, and I'll try to articulate that as we go. But let's get a little bit closer so I can talk about it. Now, hypothetically, we have, well, we'll mix a little bit more paint first. Grab some white, we'll grab some blue, grab the smallest amount of black, maybe a little bit more blue, a little bit more white. Definitely want a fair amount of paint here. And again, we don't want it to be hyper bright or hyper saturated because you want to have room to build. So, here we have the water, it's moving down here, and then hypothetically it hits this rock, it has to move around it, so we have a bit more of a curved stroke. And then it hits this rock, which again will essentially underline, and then it'll move out this way, right around that rock. So there's a movement like that, right? There's a bit of a dip. And there's going to be one of those every time it needs to move around a rock. But relatively soon, it starts to even out. And we can get back to these longer strokes, which are a bit more horizontal in nature. You can spread them out. Like that. You can also soften the edges with your finger, as I did. Going over the middle portions again, just to brighten them up. As I run out of paint, I kind of go towards the edges. And that's generally how you want to do these. You have the center area as the brightest, and then as you move towards the left and the right of the stroke, it dissipates, you lift with your brush, you get something more semi-transparent. And you slowly build that up over time. Now we definitely need to go over the bottom of more of these rocks, so we might as well do that now. And then we can focus on the movements after. As we do have quite a few rocks, and again, these lines do help us dictate where we want more water, simply by seeing the amount of detail and how the highlight looks in a particular area. Really love these smaller crevices that are created when we have a lot of rocks in a similar space. There we go. So now I can see that there's quite a bit of an opening over here. Definitely want to add some extra movements to that. Hypothetically, it'll be moving around this rock, and what do we do around a rock? Moves into a swooshing effect, which then levels out. And here we have a bit of a bend, so it's almost like doing an upside down V. And of course the water's moving this way around this rock, but it'll also move around this rock as well. So we'll get some of those going. And then it'll move around this rock, so then it's another dip. Now, we're all probably putting our rocks in slightly different areas, so I really want to articulate the why and the how, rather than, we're doing this right here, right? I want you to be able to take these ideas and instigate them in future paintings. So, let's find another rock. Well, let's go here. What do we do here? There's a divot. It's between two. It raises and then it lowers. We go for that upside down U shape, right? In these larger areas, we go back over the center and only the center to build that up, where the sides, again, should remain much more semi-transparent. And this is layer 4, I think, in that center, and it's starting to look nice. It does take some time. That's okay. Taking a step back. I don't want to overcomplicate any of this because we are going to add in some purple down even into the water, little fallen pieces. But we can just do a little bit more. I also really like a tapping effect along some edges as a kind of bonus finishing piece, where it'd be too complicated if we went for this whole motion, but you don't want the water to look stagnant. In those scenarios, I'll say, oh, you know what, right here? Let's do a couple little tap and drags, but not too many, and we'll spread them out. Same here. And that's nice. Again, so going up here, I want to connect this because I'm looking to create lanes. Just find pathways in the water. Generally, you'll find them in the deepest portions, right? More so the center. But of course, that's going to change because of all the rocks that it has to move around. So I just looked for the largest kind of opening and zigzagged in between. There we go. Now, let's grab some extra titanium white, brighten it up. Do that again. Now we can add some nice real highlights, again, only to the center. And we aim to blend it off as we get towards the side. I lift my brush. It's all adding up. Let's get a little bit farther back though, because again, while the details are nice, it's really all about making it cohesive and having it all work together. Now, as we move back and move kind of towards the top area, we're going to want to make our mixture a little bit darker. And then we will work it right around a lot of these, kind of eliminating the majority of the darker base layer that we have. Well, we'll still see it because we're not going to make this full blocky applications, but we are going to cover a lot of it with these movements. And you can see I'm working relatively quickly. This is an area where you don't have to be as methodical as the foreground and those movements. But again, with this, I just wanted it to move around the majority of the rocks to the majority of the opening, and it kind of stretches on the right-hand side of the opening here, and then it moves into the middle of the opening, and then it just breaks apart around each rock, and it breaks apart around this rock, and it breaks apart around that rock. So it's a very common theme. I thought about how I explained it before and how I could kind of simplify it, and I think that really is the simplest way of explaining it. You move it through the largest opening, and then every time you hit a rock, you have it do a hard curve around said rock, and then return to the general movement of the water, or alternatively, if you don't want to overdo it, again, you just go to that tapping motion we talked about. Okay, I think that is working really nicely. Maybe now we go in with a little bit of a highlight, now that we know what we're doing. So, here we have our main movement. Going in with a bit of a highlight in the middle. We can blend the side off just a bit. And then I'll continue moving it up here. And then into the back a little bit. I do want this movement to continue. So we kind of tried a couple of different things with the darker pigment, and now I'm ready to commit to moving it up like this. And you can see that it's a nice highlight amongst the darker rocks and the more purple reflection. Really feels like a path. Though I don't want it to be too linear, I don't want it to be too obvious, so I'm actually going to create a second one. And then that too can move up and kind of get lost up here. So now we have this movement, but we also have this movement. So they're on a similar trajectory, similar angle, but they're not connected, and they definitely break up the general flow while following the same rules. And that's what we wanted to do. Feel like we need a bit more of a highlight over here just because it's so centralized, everything. Luckily, we do have some big rocks to work around. Just have that water, again, skimming around and moving back. Though we don't want to do every area because we don't want it to become too much really quickly, right? Grab a little bit more titanium white, a little bit more blue. Now that we have so much of it, we can build up our highlight in the middle a little bit more to have areas that really do stand out. Capture that attention. There we go. And again, I keep going over here because it's off to the side. It doesn't really disturb anything else, but it does balance things. And it makes this general movement less obvious. That general movement is good. It subconsciously moves the viewer into the painting. It's a leading line. But we don't want it to be too obvious what we're doing. It just doesn't look natural if there aren't other areas that have a true highlight, because they would. There we go. Yeah, it's looking quite nice. Again, diverting off our main path. And we'll just do a couple little taps here. Give the water a little bit more of a ripple effect, as if maybe there's a large sheet of rock underneath. Like that a lot. Now we find ourselves in a scenario where the painting is looking quite nice, each element of it is, but it doesn't really connect. We have all of this very vibrant color at the top, and then it's much more subdued and muted down here. So we need to take the color up there, put it down there, and have it really flow. So I have my 1-inch flat-headed brush. We're going to grab some of our titanium white, probably about an equal amount of our magenta, and then about 1/5 that Mars Black. We'll mix up a very nice pigment here, see if it matches what we have. It's a little too saturated, so we'll add in some extra titanium white and Mars Black to interject some gray into it. And then we'll do another little test. And we want something that's essentially not the brightest of pigments, but close to it, right below the brightest of pigments. So I really like what we have there. Test went well. We will switch to our fan brush, make the tips of it nice and damp, pick up some paint, remember, get both sides, and then we'll come down here and we'll start tapping on some of our fallen pieces. And this can be on the ground, so on the pathway that we have, most definitely. But it can also be out on the rocks, and that's where they're really going to build up. And then we can have the occasional one moving in the water as well. So normally with the rocks I like to add on things like moss, but I opted not to do that here so that it didn't look overcomplicated when we started to add all of the pink. We'll do a lot more on that side, but I do like to jump around just so we don't accidentally do too much in one area and then therefore force ourselves to do more elsewhere. So we'll just continue applying. We are going to cover up a lot of our previously applied detail. That is okay, don't worry about that. It really is just part of the process, and it will look a lot better for it in the end. I'd also like to note that I'm pressing a lot harder with my brush when I am in the foreground to again render larger applications, but as I move farther back here, I'm applying as little pressure as possible so that I get much smaller markings. It doesn't always work out perfectly, but there is a technique to it, and you can have more control than you would assume. Here I'm really finding, I find a good amount. It's adding up well. I think that it's starting to connect. Definitely need far more over here. And again, we are going to need to put some in the water, but I am waiting more so until the end, until I have a better idea of how full it all is and just how much color we need. Because I also don't want to do too much, right? It's all about finding that balance. Here I'm also just using the single cluster of bristles to add on some detail in the background here. Take a couple steps back. It's looking good. Glad we put as many rocks out in the water as we did. Gives us lots of opportunity to add these on. Accidentally pressed a little bit too hard there. Ended up getting a couple of streaks, but we'll just go over it numerous times with this and cover a lot of it up. There we go. Taking a step back again. I think that actually worked really well. Grab more of that pigment. And now I think I'm ready to start moving it out into the water. And it'll be most noticeable in these darker areas, because the value will be similar to what we have in the foreground, where this will be brighter than what we have in the background. I'm going to do a lot of it right back here. Just like that. And you know what? Let's brighten it a little bit. Let's add some highlight. Extra titanium white to the mixture. And maybe a bit more saturation, because that titanium white did take out quite a bit of the saturation. Now we can add this highlight on top of our previous clusters and build some extra depth. So now I'm heading back to the rocks, building on them. There we go. Starting to re-establish some form, as when we applied that last major amount, kind of connected a lot of things more so than we might want them to be. And so by adding in extra values, we can recraft the tops of subjects and reinstigate form. Like that. Let's take a step back. It's looking quite nice. Grab a bit more of that titanium white. Work it in there. Again, just slowly building. Just like we did at the top. And I'll also work some up here just so we ensure that we have matching values. So upon getting a little closer, I realized that I really want to reinstigate some form, particularly within the rocks. So I'll grab some Mars Black, a little bit of titanium white. We'll go for more of that silhouetted pigment. And out more so in the middle areas, we will recreate some of that rock. Doesn't all have to be full of the little cherry blossoms. We can have some on top, but we don't need them to be. I think we just need to simplify. There we go. Creating the extra negative space in the rocks is definitely helping. Grab a little bit of titanium white. Just go in for some slight highlights. But I'm not going to go with the texture detail that we did before. I like that a lot, but I think it would just be visually too much at this point. So I'm just going to create some edging and some highlights. Very simply. Go back to the darker pigment. Reinstigate some more rocks. I think it's already looking a lot better. Again, wonderful thing about acrylics, you can apply a lot of paint, make it something you love, or make it something you don't love, and then remedy it quite quickly. Because it dries so fast, it doesn't leave real texture normally. It's just very efficient to play with. That's what we're doing. There we are. Just breaking apart these clusters to an extent. Again, already looking a whole lot better. It's all about finding that balance. Just going to go back and reinstigate some smaller rocks. Really starting to come together. That said, I would like to say a big thank you to you for being here. Really nice that we are able to spend the time creating this together. I know it's, well, none of these are ever really all that quick anymore, but I know it's a bit of a longer lesson, and I really love the journey we've been able to go on. I think that the painting's been through so many different stages, and we've been working up to something pretty great. It's been I think it's been a couple of years actually since I did a cherry scene, so it's really fun. Definitely almost nostalgic at a point. I did quite a few of these different iterations of this subject, right? When I started the channel quite a few years ago, and something that I really enjoyed, but I know I just didn't have the image, I didn't have the idea last year. I didn't have the inspiration. And I wanted to make it something I really prioritized this year. So I've been thinking about it for the last couple months, and I kind of landed again on this image that I had already painted, but the very different color palette, different season, and it seemed like it fit so well. And I feel like it's really turning out. Now that we're going back in and fixing up a lot of these rocks, making it less messy. There we go. So much to do. Oh, really is enjoyable. Okay. Let's clean up this area a little bit, and then we'll take another step back. We will reassess, and then from there we will figure out how we want to progress. I think I'm going to make this one large rock though, because again, the painting got very complicated very quickly, and I want to simplify, and making that a singular, larger piece definitely aids us in eliminating detail. Again, something we definitely needed to do, one way or another. And I like that it's a larger subject in the true foreground. We'll just add a slight highlight to it. Give it some different levels. Third application, now the highlights. There we go. Now, I took a little break. Took 15 minutes, stepped back from the painting, really assessed where we were going, what we wanted to do, and I think simplifying the rocks in the way that we did in the foreground really helped it. It definitely needed some retraction of detail, and I think that was it. However, I think we need to balance all of the bright highlight that we have going on within the pinks. And the best way to do that, I think, is to increase the highlight that we have in the blue and the water. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab a little bit of our ultramarine blue, quite a lot of our titanium white, probably about 4/5 titanium white to ultramarine blue, We really want this to be bright, and I'm not going to use any Mars Black because I don't want to dampen it, desaturate it. I want this to be a powerful pigment. Now I'm going to find the most prominent areas in our water. They are predominantly going to be around the foreground because that's where we can see that detail, those highlights, right? And I'm going to move this around, not just in the main path, but again, around our other rocks, because I want this highlight to draw the viewer in. I don't want the eye to be overwhelmed by all of the pink. We need a different color to kind of take that lead. We already have the blue, we already have the highlights, we have the movements in the water. I think it's a really pretty subject, and we can just enhance it a little bit. And I think that'll do exactly what we need in the painting. Again, not always doing strokes, sometimes switching to a tapping method. Here, moving back into that longer strand that we had. Doing a couple highlights in the back here, maybe not too many, but a couple. Can kind of break up some of the more monotonous areas that became either too dark because of rocks or too pink because of the last application. There we go. This was definitely what the painting needed. It's more detail, which is what we just eliminated, but it's a different kind of detail, right? It's a different color, it's a different application style. The value is different. I'm even going over some of the fallen cherry blossoms with the water to show that they're slightly submerged. Give it that extra layer of depth when you're really up close to the painting. And I'm doing a lot of little tap and drags right here just to build up the extra detail in the most prominent portion of the foreground. Consistently taking a couple steps back, as we do, and finishing it off. So, yet again, thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of this grand painting journey. Come together. At this point, it seems like every other week, create something special, learn a few things, try a few things. I do really hope you feel like you learned something today and that you're excited to go out and paint your own version of it. Please feel free to take artistic liberties, make it your own, but really just have fun, relax, and enjoy the painting process. I know I certainly did. This one was really, really enjoyable. And I'm glad we were finally able to get back to a cherry tree piece, right? After all these years, actually. Actually, all these years. It's been really wonderful. Again, I'd like to say a big thank you to everybody who is directly supporting the channel up over on Patreon. It's because of you that this lesson happened. It's because of you that all of the future lessons will happen. And if you are new to the channel, and it's your very first time watching, do you remember up there you can get the traceables, help you with the drawing process, the reference photos, help you with color matching for most paintings, so this one is an exception, but that is generally how it works. You can get all 5 of my ebooks, including Acrylics for Beginners, the ebook full of traceables, well I say ebook, 3 ebooks full of traceables for those uninspired days, access to our Facebook group, bonus lessons, all that fun stuff. And again, also just a great way to support the channel if you'd like to, if you can. But again, if you can't, no worries at all. Again, I'm just very very appreciative that you made it this far. I think that's wonderful. I think that if you put this amount of time into learning the process, you're going to go out and you're going to do great. And I wish you so much success with your rendition. I like that a lot, by the way. We have a couple highlights spread out, kind of moving away from that individual line and kind of applying some fun other areas. I think it's doing a lot for the piece. This is definitely one that I could continue working on for hours. But I feel like an 8-hour painting lesson might be a lot for YouTube. Hopefully this one is like 2.5. But yeah, could definitely spend significantly more hours on so many portions of this, but I'm actually really happy with where we got, especially in the time that we did. You feel free to take your time. You feel free to have fun with it. Such a hard thing putting the brush down. But again, thank you for being here. You have a wonderful day. And above all, as always, stay creative.